The autumn sun had barely crested the horizon when Jacob Morrison noticed something wasn't right. His housekeeper, Emma Clark, was moving differently that morning, favoring her left leg as she carried water from the well to the kitchen. Jacob was a man of few words, preferring the company of his horses and cattle to people, but he wasn't blind to suffering when it stood right in front of him. Emma had been working at the Morrison Ranch for nearly 3 months. She was a quiet girl, maybe 22 or 23, with kind eyes that seemed to carry more weight than her years suggested. She'd arrived in response to an advertisement Jacob had reluctantly placed in the town newspaper after his elderly housekeeper had passed away. He needed help maintaining the sprawling ranch house, and Emma needed work. It was a simple arrangement, or so he'd thought. That morning, as Jacob watched her struggle to hide her limp while preparing breakfast, something stirred in his chest, a protective instinct he hadn't felt since his younger sister had left for the East Coast years ago. He set down his coffee cup with deliberate care and cleared his throat. "Emma," he said, his voice gravelly from disuse. "What happened to your leg?" She froze mid-motion, her hand hovering over the cast-iron skillet. "Nothing, Mr. Morrison. Just twisted my ankle a bit. Infine, truly." But Jacob Morrison hadn't survived 43 years on the frontier by being a fool. He'd seen men lie about injuries before. Pride was a powerful thing, but there was something different in Emma's eyes. It wasn't pride keeping her silent. It was fear. "Let me see it," he said, standing from the table. "Mr. Morrison, really, Emma." His tone left no room for argument. "Sit down and let me see your leg." Reluctantly, she lowered herself into a chair, her hands trembling slightly as she lifted the hem of her long skirt just enough to reveal her ankle. What Jacob saw made his jaw tighten. The ankle was swollen and discolored, but worse than that were the finger-shaped bruises that clearly wrapped around her calf, bruises that could only have come from someone grabbing her violently. Jacob's eyes lifted to meet hers. "Who did this?" Emma's face went pale. "Mr. Morrison, please. It's nothing. Emma." He knelt down beside her chair, his voice softer now but no less serious. "I may not be much for talking, but I know what I'm looking at. Someone hurt you. Tell me who." Tears began to well in her eyes, and for a long moment she said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. "My brother, Thomas. He came by last night after you'd retired. He wanted money, said I owed him for room and board from before I came here. When I told him I'd already given him most of my wages last month, he got angry." Jacob felt his blood run cold. He'd never met Emma's brother, but he knew the type. Men who preyed on those weaker than themselves, who used family obligation as an excuse for cruelty. "Where is he now?" "I don't know. He left after," she gestured helplessly at her leg. "He said he'd be back next week for more money. Mr. Morrison, please don't make trouble. He's dangerous when he's crossed, and I don't want anyone getting hurt because of me." Jacob stood slowly, his mind already working through what needed to be done. "How long has this been going on?" Emma's silence was answer enough. He could see it now in retrospect, the way she'd sometimes flinch at sudden movements, the careful way she'd count her wages as if already calculating how much she'd have to surrender, the shadows under her eyes from sleepless nights spent worrying. "This ends today," Jacob said firmly. "You work for me now, and no one, family or otherwise, has the right to hurt you and demand money you've earned honestly." "But Mr. Morrison." "Novats. I'm riding into town to speak with Sheriff Matthews. This needs to be on record." Emma stood abruptly, panic flashing across her face. "Please, you don't understand. Thomas has friends. If he finds out I talked to the sheriff, he'll what?" Jacob's voice was quiet but carried an edge of steel. "Come after you on my property? I'd like to see him try." The ride into town took Jacob an hour. He spent most of it thinking about his own sister, Sarah, and how fiercely he would have defended her against any threat. Emma might not be blood, but she was under his protection now, and Jacob Morrison took that responsibility seriously. Sheriff Tom Matthews looked up from his desk when Jacob walked into the small office on Main Street. The two men had known each other for 15 years, and Tom could read Jacob's moods better than most. "Jacob, Don't often see you in town midweek. Something wrong. Jacob removed his hat and sat down heavily in the chair across from the sheriff's desk. Need to report an assault. My housekeeper, Emma Clark. Her brother came onto my property last night and hurt her. Threatened to come back for more money. Tom leaned forward, his expression serious. She all right? Bruised ankle, finger marks on her leg where he grabbed her. She's scared of him, Tom. Says he's dangerous. The sheriff pulled out a ledger and began taking notes. You know the brother's full name? Thomas Clark. Emma says he has friends, implies they might be the rough type. Tom's jaw tightened. Thomas Clark. Yeah, I know him. He's been in town a few months now, runs with a group that plays cards at the saloon most nights. We've had to break up a couple fights they've started. You sure you want to press this, Jacob? Not that you shouldn't. You absolutely should, but Clark's going to know who reported it. I'm aware, Jacob said flatly. But I'm not going to stand by while some bully terrorizes a woman who's done nothing but honest work. She's under my employ and my protection. If Clark has a problem with that, he can take it up with me directly. Tom nodded slowly, a hint of respect in his eyes. All right then. I'll need Emma to come in and make a formal statement. Can you bring her by tomorrow? I can. But Tom, I want you to understand something. Jacob leaned forward, his gaze intense. If Clark shows up at my ranch again, I'm not going to wait for the law to handle it. I have every right to protect my property and the people on it. I know you do, Jacob. Just try not to shoot anybody if you can help it. Makes the paperwork hell. Despite the gravity of the situation, both men shared a brief, grim smile. The next day, Emma gave her statement to the sheriff, her voice shaking but growing stronger as she detailed not just the most recent incident, but a pattern of abuse and extortion that had been going on for over a year. Tom listened carefully, taking detailed notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When they finished, Tom looked at Emma with genuine concern. Miss Clark, I want you to know that we take this seriously. I'm going to issue a warrant for your brother's arrest for assault and extortion. He won't be able to come near you legally. But will that stop him? Emma asked quietly. Tom exchanged a glance with Jacob. It should. And if it doesn't, well, that's what Mr. Morrison and I are here for. Word spread quickly in a small town, and by that evening, Thomas Clark knew the sheriff was looking for him. Rather than face arrest, he made a decision that would prove to be his greatest mistake. He gathered 3 of his friends, all men who'd had run-ins with the law before, and decided to ride out to the Morrison Ranch to teach his sister a lesson about family loyalty. They arrived just after sunset, drunk and angry. Jacob was in the barn tending to his horses when he heard the commotion, men's voices shouting, and then Emma's scream from inside the house. He grabbed his rifle and moved quickly toward the house, his heart pounding. Thomas Clark had kicked in the kitchen door and was dragging Emma by her arm when Jacob appeared in the doorway, rifle leveled. Let her go. Now. Thomas, emboldened by whiskey and the presence of his friends, laughed. This is family business, Morrison, not your concern. She's my employee, on my property. That makes it very much my concern. Let her go and leave, or I'll make you leave. One of Thomas's friends reached for his gun, but before he could clear leather, a shot rang out from behind Jacob. Sheriff Matthews stepped into view, his own rifle smoking. I'd reconsider that if I were you, boys. That was a warning shot. The next one won't be. Tom had suspected Clark might try something, and had ridden out to the Morrison Ranch as a precaution. His timing couldn't have been better. Faced with 2 armed men and the certainty of arrest, Thomas's bravado crumbled. He released Emma, who stumbled toward Jacob. The sheriff and his deputy, who'd been waiting outside, quickly arrested all 4 men. As they were loading Thomas and his friends into the wagon for transport back to town, the youngest of Clark's gang started talking, trying to cut a deal. What he revealed shocked even Sheriff Matthews. Thomas Clark and his associates had been running a protection racket targeting several immigrant families and women working domestic jobs around the county, threatening them and taking portions of their wages. The investigation that followed uncovered at least 7 other victims, all too frightened to come forward until Emma's case gave them courage. Thomas Clark and his associates were eventually sentenced to 5 years in prison for extortion, assault, and conspiracy. Emma stayed on at the Morrison Ranch, where her limp gradually healed. Jacob, true to his quiet nature, never made much of what he'd done, but Emma knew. She'd found not just employment but safety and dignity, things she'd thought forever lost. Sometimes in the evenings, as they sat on the porch after dinner, Emma would thank Jacob for his intervention. He'd always wave it off with a gruff, "Just did what needed doing." But Emma knew better. In a world that often looked the other way from suffering, especially when it involved women and family matters, Jacob Morrison had chosen to see her, to believe her, and to act. The story of the quiet rancher who'd stood up to protect his housekeeper became something of a legend in the county, though Jacob himself would have been mortified to know it. For him, it had never been about heroics. It had simply been about doing what was right, about recognizing that silence in the face of cruelty was itself a form of wrong. And on his ranch, under his protection, there would be no more silence.